that, I want to tell Melanie how much gratitude I have for her and her associates who helped me at Carolina's Biofeedback, and I proudly introduce her to you all, to give her speech today about neurosciences and brain.
Thank you. Well, hello everyone. I'm really, really pleased to be here. Susan, where'd she go? Watching your transformation is the joy that we get out of doing what we do, and I don't even have words for that. So I really appreciate your kind words. I get to make my living helping people with chronic stress or trauma in their history, to be able to cope a little better and to be able to do things differently in the future. A lot of times that does involve things like sleep and joy and even breathing. My life looks really similar to yours, though. You might think because I do this for a living I don't have stress or I don't deal with problems day to day. We run crazy, busy, successful businesses. We have employees. We have families of origin to differing degrees of dysfunction. We have significant others that we love and care about, and some that we have to care for. We have needs, but first we plate spin and we task toggle and we skimp on things like rest and exercise and meals and sleep. Work bleeds into our personal time. We allow our calendars to fill so that every square inch of white space is used. And our minds look really similar to that, don't they? We have worry and we have to-do lists and we have tasks that we get caught up thinking about all the time. And then we wonder why am I feeling so stressed? And why can't I sleep? And why am I emotionally wrung out? I'd like today to be the start of something different for you. I can't hook all of you up individually right now to the type of brain equipment that we're lucky enough to have, but I hope that when you leave today you have some ideas, you have some new ways of thinking about things, you have some new ways of positioning how you're going to meander through your day. I want us to set aside whatever you came in with. I'm not living under the impression that this was easy for you to get here today. Probably for most of you, there was quite a few things that you were having to text on as you walked in the door. So let's take a minute and breathe. Let's just breathe for just a minute, and let's slow things down a little bit and make sure we are really in the room. Let's come into the room. So everybody take a nice deep breath in. I'll do it with you. And as we let that air come back out, we're going to be setting things aside and we're going to come into this moment and be very present. That way you can focus on yourself for a few minutes and you can learn about your burned out brain and ways to prevent burnout from taking you down. So with that, burned out, be damned. Resilience starts now. I think we have a full house today because we can all relate to burnout, but did you know that 3/4 of all medical visits are related to stress? They believe that stress is the underlying cause of 70 to 90% of the disease and mental illness. 50% of CEOs, 75% of directors report feeling burned out. Maybe half this room. Possibly. And there's a trickle-down effect because 80% of the workforce admits to being stressed. In fact, 42% of the respondents to a specific poll said they left their jobs, and 35% additional said that they were thinking about leaving their jobs because of workplace stress. The cost of burnout is estimated to be between $300 and $500 billion. So everyone has stress. So why is stress such a big deal? I mean, can't stress be good for you and help you be sharp and perform well? Can stress be prevented anyway? And what if it can't? What if it keeps coming and just keeps coming and piles on and there's no relief in sight? I like to make sure you know what these words mean. So we use stress each and every day, but there's a difference between stress and stressor. Stress is actually the reaction that's occurring in your body and in your brain and in your emotions to any demand that requires energy. That means that there is a good kind of stress. A certain level of stress helps us to perform well, like if you're in a sport and you're in a competitive situation, you're going to actually rise to the occasion and perform hopefully at your best at that time. And stress reactions can be managed. The reactions internally, and that's a lot of what we do, is teach that, and you can recover from stress. Stressors, on the other hand, are any of those factors that gives rise to that stress response. It's inevitable. You can't always stop stressors from coming. I will talk with you later on about one way that you can diminish them. And interestingly, the degree of detriment from a stressor has to do with your perspective on it. Whether you invited it, like caring for an ailing parent, for instance, an elderly parent, if you chose that, the wear and tear of that stressor on you is significantly diminished. It was actually part of my master's thesis, that specific study. Then there's toxic stress, and toxic stress is when energy literally is depleted, and that's because chronic stress kept coming and there was no recovery. So one of the things you're going to learn today is about recovery and how do you do that? How do you make that happen? It impairs your executive function. I'm going to teach you why. It compromises performance. It negatively impacts our health. But burnout is predictable, and so we want to learn the warning signs, and burnout is preventable, so we want to learn the skills. So why are Uber entrepreneurs so vulnerable to chronic stress and burnout? I would like to suggest that it's because the skills that you use to get you this far, like supreme self-sacrifice, powering through the impossible, and delegating, are not the skills that help you recover from the heaping mounds of stressors. This is about you and yourself. It can't be delegated. It can't be muscled into submission, and it can't be put on a back burner without a consequence. They didn't teach you about your brain or your nervous system in business school, but they did teach you about concepts like capacity and scarcity and balance sheets and efficiencies. And all of those skills will translate into the brain and body systems, but we need some fundamental guiding principles before we can make that kind of leap. First thing is that neurons that fire together wire together. Hopefully you've heard that somewhere along the way. It's true. Everything is connected. The brain, the body, our emotions, and the interplay between them is important. And we can intersect with any of those three, as a matter of fact. We cannot outperform our well-being. So a lot of us put our well-being at the bottom of the list when we're making our priorities. And yeah, I'll get to that later. I'll try meditation someday. I'll try yoga someday. Whatever the things are that are at the bottom of your list, I would suggest that maybe after today, you'll see some reasons why your well-being needs to be near the top, especially if you're the captain of the ship for your family or for your business. Stress is only stress if we don't recover from it. And that is what resilience is the idea that the stress comes, you have the reaction, you learn how to bring that back down to the neutral state before the next stress comes, or maybe after a few of them have piled on. That's an important one. We're going to return to that. And the last thing I want to say about that is awareness precedes change. You cannot change that which you're not paying attention to. So let's bring this into focus. And I want to talk to you about something called background burnout. I think you call it multitasking. There is no such thing. The brain literally cannot concentrate or learn two things at the same time. What we actually are doing is we're toggling really fast back and forth between tasks. That's what we're doing, we're toggling. And that toggling requires a tremendous amount of energy, and it's happening in the background. That's not even the foreground of what you're trying to accomplish that day. But that process of toggling is exhausting to the whole nervous system. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page about that, because toggling comes at a cost. It decreases your attention span. It makes it very hard for you to learn new things. Your short-term memory is compromised, and your overall mental performance is compromised. Step one is awareness, because chronic stress without the self-awareness equals denial, and denial is disastrous. If we ignore it or we try to avoid it, we get blindsided by either failures in our body system or our brain systems. Without awareness, our relationships tank before we even realize what's happening. Without it, our mental health and our physical health become the warning signs. And the earlier you can catch it, the sooner you become aware, the easier it is to turn it around. So, what are the warning signs, and which of them do you recognize? So let's look at this first list. I can read them to you. You can read them: memory issues, sleeplessness or insomnia, obsessive thinking, mental fatigue, physical fatigue, irritability or cynicism, impulsivity. I had somebody come into the office who had quit their job very impulsively because things weren't going the way that he had been told they would be going. And this is a sign of burnout. So he had let himself get to the point where he made a really disastrous decision. And it's actually 2 years after he did that, and he hasn't found anything new. So it matters. We might have trouble decision making. We might experience more emotional reactivity, and if you're not sure, ask your spouse. Maybe we're always sick. A cold comes around, the flu comes around, and we're the one that gets bronchitis or gets pneumonia. Or we find that we're really slow to recover or heal. Powerlessness, loss of interest in others, loss of interest in your job, depressed mood, anxiousness, or self-medicating. First, I want to make a point about that last item. There's a statistic that says that alcohol consumption increases the odds of burnout by 25%. So what starts out as a coping thing or something to help your nervous system calm down, slow down, relax, can actually usher in the burnout process even faster. I'd like to know, out of this list here, how many of you have 5 or more of the items on here? Oh, thank you for your honesty. Yeah, you're in the right place. This is the right talk to be in. It's hard sometimes to evaluate that in yourself. So I want to show you a very brief 1-minute video of a veteran and I worked at the VA hospital for 5 years. This is a veteran who had been on 2 14-month deployments. He was exposed to 25 IEDs, those are the explosives. He lost consciousness 5 times. He was a police officer before, so the chances are really high that he came into his deployment already sort of stress elevated. He had been in an intensive outpatient treatment plan for 2 years prior to this video. So this is after 2 years of trying to come back, trying to recover. He's at the point of this video, he's in the Warrior Reset program, which is an intensive program that's very short burst in terms of the calendar. So he received something called Neurofeedback that we'll talk about briefly in a little bit at that program. So I want you to get a chance to hear him.
Hell, I don't know what it's called, but I was skeptical at first, and after trying it for a few sessions, I went from my normal hours of sleep between 2 to 4 hours, all the way up to 13 hours one day. Now my sleep quality has improved. I fall asleep faster without medications, and actually wake up refreshed. Now my sleep is currently at about 6 to 8 hours, and I feel like I'm less irritable, less angry, and so I think it's really helped my PTSD a lot. I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to work on this thing and to test it out. That's it.
So more than the words that he was saying, what do you notice about him?
Very calm.
Okay. What else? How's his energy level? It's not very good, is it? Very low energy level. I think it actually leaped over the first 3 or 4 seconds for some reason. And in the beginning, he's asked to just talk, and they don't tell him what to say. And he's very, very, very irritable, like, I don't know, whatever. What's this called? I don't even know what we're doing. What are we doing? I don't know what we're doing. And I'm sorry that it missed that, but there was definite irritability. There's some apathy. This is 2 years into a recovery program and having had, I think, 2 or 3 sessions of neuro training. So he was seeing effects on his sleep, but I'm suggesting to you that that there's a lot more from our warning list, right? That shows up just in his voice, in his affect. I think you can pick up a little bit about the depressed mood. Can you kind of feel that? A little bit low mood and slow speech pattern. We're going to return to him in a little bit. I want you to see what you notice of the changes as things progress forward. So what I want to do now is I want to help you get a little more brain savvy. This may have been kind of what made you want to come to the talk, because like I said, in your business schools, you don't get taught much about the nervous system and the brain and how all this stuff ties together and how it works, and why do I feel sad or depressed or anxious, or why can't I sleep. So I want to get you familiar with a few of the structural as well as chemical things going on in the brain. And I promise no test at the end, so you can just take it in. Let's get familiar with the key players, namely the prefrontal cortex. This is this part of your brain, and it acts like the CEO of the brain. It's directing, it's managing, and it's carrying out super complex functions. It does attention, planning, manages your urges, manages your mood. Your decision making takes place here. And importantly, it's also the link between our emotions and our reason, our rational self. Next up is the limbic system. And the limbic system is a lot like the chief of security. And embedded in the limbic system is something called the amygdala. I'm using real terms here because it makes it a little easier to talk about. And these are good words to know. So if the chief of security is the whole limbic system, the amygdala is the patrol who's going back and forth and watching for any trigger that needs a fight or a flight or a freeze response. In fact, that may be more familiar to you. Maybe you've heard fight flight before. That's this part of the brain. It's the limbic system, and it's, as you can see, very deeply embedded in that. I can't get to that, but really deeply into the brain. Here's the prefrontal cortex up here. This is where we hold our emotional memories. And it can be very easily triggered. For some people, it is a very, very quick trigger. It processes all of our emotions, and it controls the way that we react to triggers or perceived threats. And one key point that I really want to make sure that you guys leave with is that to this part of the brain, perception is the very same thing as reality. That there really is no distinction. So literally what you imagine triggers the limbic system in the amygdala as if it's happening. We'll talk about that a little bit more too. The emotional brain is faster than the cognitive brain, especially in reactions. So higher brain centers can actually get surprised by strong emotional stimuli. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. I wanted you to know, in terms of the anatomy of burnout, these parts of the brain that we're talking about, namely the prefrontal cortex here and the limbic system, if you'll notice, the senses, the sensory inputs are represented. So what we see, the sights and the sounds and the tactile and how cold the room is or how hot the room is, that sort of thing. All of that information is coming in at approximately 10 things per second. So what happens to those 10 things per second is the part that we're going to concern ourselves with today, because if we can get it to go to this big blue orby thing up here called the thalamus, see how the line from it goes up here? That means that those things that are deemed important will come up to be remembered, used in our learning, factor into our decision making, all those prefrontal cortex things and the higher thinking, higher order thinking. If, however, whatever is coming in goes to that red thing, for instance, this is coming from the nose, so let's say we all smelled smoke. I don't think that this talk would be important to any of us anymore. We would get up and leave because the limbic system, and namely the amygdala, would have harnessed the fact that smoke is not normal in this room and we got to get out of here, and we would be getting to our feet and moving. And that means blood flow changes happen, and it activates not only the nervous system, which I'm going to show you just on the next slide, but also the chemical reaction. There's a cascade of chemical reactions that's occurring as well. So the idea, as you're learning skills, is to change this up, because you wouldn't want that reaction of I've got to get out of here to happen at a cookout. If you smelled smoke at a cookout, A+, that's awesome, bring on the hot dogs. So that's part of the challenge, is to get the limbic system to stand down and for the cortex to be the one that is interpreting our world and deciding what we need to do with it. This is the response system, the autonomic nervous system. It is the nervous system that handles all of what we think of as automatic responses. Digestion is a good example, because I don't think any of us are actually trying to direct how our lunches are being handled. So that's one example of the many, many things on here that are controlled by the nervous system. But too much of the activation of the limbic system causes us to go into a fight, flight, or freeze, because we're using the sympathetic nervous system. I call it redlining. You can think of it as being on an electric fence, if you want to, that kind of idea. It's okay in short bursts. We handle stress pretty well. Crises, we do well, just like our medical system. Crises, they do very, very well. It's the long-term chronic stuff that we're not so good at, right? So that's our fight flight. What we need to do is make sure that the parasympathetic is getting its time. So they actually work like this. They work in a take turns kind of way. So if the sympathetic nervous system is in charge and stays in charge, you will burn that system out. And this system over here, known as the parasympathetic, which is our rest and digest side, it's rest. So that's why I can't sleep. In part, yeah, absolutely. And it loses tone, uses its pathway down the body is the longest nerve in the body called the vagus nerve, and that vagus nerve loses its tone when it's not utilized. So a lot of our techniques cause this to happen. And then it'll go back as soon as you get cut off in traffic. And we're teaching both, and we're building tone the same way you'd go to like a gym and work out with a personal trainer on muscles. So this activation causes a whole cascade of chemical responses in the nervous system that's governed by 3 places, 1 in your body and 2 in your brain. And it's abbreviated as the HPA axis because it's the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenal. And when one gets triggered, it triggers the other, and then that last one goes back to the first one, and it goes on a circle and a circle. And so have you heard of, maybe on commercials, cortisol? Yeah, that's our stress hormone. And adrenaline, everybody knows adrenaline because you've been in PE or at some point in your life. Those are the 2 big chemicals that help us to, you've heard stories about people having superhuman strength and lifting a car off of a child or an animal or something like that. It's possible with adrenaline. So there's some good factors with that. But if it keeps going, it becomes corrosive and toxic. And so then it's no longer a helping thing. Getting this to turn off is not always easy. And this is what is regulating our immune system and our digestion. Our mood and emotions are definitely influenced by how much cortisol and that sort of thing is running in our system. And it absolutely affects our energy level. So I don't need to go through everything on this slide, but just know that a chronic stress to this system causes adrenal fatigue. Anybody heard of that before? And adrenal fatigue can take between 3 and 24 months, depending on exactly what the severity and duration have been for you to recover from adrenal fatigue. It's a big deal. So I'm going to talk really quickly about 2 other aspects, the structure and the function of the brain. This is the whole brain, and we're actually looking through one side to see the interior portion there. But what's being pointed to is the prefrontal cortex, and that actually thins as a response to ongoing chronic and toxic stress. It affects our memory, and it affects our attention, and it affects our learning. Our prefrontal cortex does thin as we age, but it's a very slow process, and most people don't really notice it until they're well into their 80s, typically. But this can happen in a teenager. This could happen in a high school or college student as well. The amygdala actually grows in size. It's measurable. There's a measurable growth in the amygdala. That means it's more powerful, stronger, and it's going to snatch up incoming information more often. This affects your mood regulation and increases reactivity. So if you find yourself snapping at family members, perhaps, maybe people you work with, that might be why. There's also 3 key regions that, with ongoing chronic and toxic stress and burnout, that end up becoming hyper connected. And those 3 key regions, you can see it in 2 ways there. One more. What we want is the left-hand side, where there's a distinct area here and a distinct area here, but what happens is all of that gets lit up in between, and you can see there, I didn't actually put the words there, that came with the chart, but psychosis is possible. That's where that piece of it comes in. So this is a fMRI image of a healthy brain that's optimally functioning. And then here's the brain under chronic stress, and there are the areas that get hyper-connected. But at the same time, the prefrontal cortex literally goes offline, and stress changes in the brain are responsible for our memory problems, fatigue, feelings of inadequacy, depressed mood, depleted energy level. We're talking about the function now of the brain. And there's actually a disconnect between the amygdala and that prefrontal cortex. And so the regulator of our emotions and the manager of our emotions are not talking anymore. And so everything seems exaggerated and big. So that looks pretty bleak, right? Like, oh my God, does my brain look like that, right? So the question is, can it be reversed? And yes, good news. That's why I'm standing here, because we can do that naturally and non-invasively. Everything from bad habits to chronic pain, our brains can learn and unlearn. We can be taught how to rebalance the autonomic nervous system. We can learn how to rest the HPA axis and bathe our cells in healthy hormones. Even our limbic system can be rehabilitated and retrained. Our brains have the capacity to heal themselves. I often say our brains are amazing. And we only know a fraction at this point, but it's way more than we ever did used to know. So that's good. So next I'm going to shift into some power moves, some things that you can be doing to relieve and help the burnout now that you kind of understand what the costs are up there and why you might be experiencing some of the things you are. Some of them are low tech and innate and ready to employ, and others of them take full advantage of the most sophisticated edge of science techniques of brain hacking for superpowered recovery and ultimately resilience. We're going to start with brain powered. We have 200 billion brain cells. There are 50,000 thoughts per day. 35,000 decisions each day. I would probably guess that this group might be even higher than that. We have 700 new neurons being produced every day. There's hope. Our brain has a pattern of connectivity that is as unique as fingerprints. We are right now, I'm going to talk next about brain mapping, and we are right now getting ready to cross the threshold of 700 brain maps, and I'm seeing it with my own eyes. No two look alike. And it's baffling to see that. You expect to see certain things to be the same, but everybody is different. The birth of new neurons means that new neural connections are always possible, and the pruning that goes on at the synapse level means that old habits can die. Brain plasticity means our brains change, heal, and grow throughout our lifespan. We used to think that our brains were fully formed, maybe by the time we reached adulthood, and then the inevitable decline would ensue at age 25. And that's not true. Neuroplasticity means that our brains are actually wired to learn as we age. And so what's happened is we've discovered some technologies that give us access to that neuroplasticity, and we can use it in a positive way. So just like your brain learned from negative experiences in your life, your brain can heal itself, optimize, and become more resilient to stress. The mind only has access to 10% of what our brain is busy doing. Neurofeedback, which is what we're going to talk about next, gives us access to the other 90%. This is a high-tech power move. So this is what the brain mapping looks like. And what that brain map is doing is reading cortical energy and activity throughout your brain across 20 locations on your brain simultaneously. And that allows me then, after the fact, to analyze 7 key cortical networks and up to 55 functional areas of the brain. For instance, Brodmann 7 houses handwriting. So if you have terrible handwriting, probably that area is one that is more amygdala run than it is cortex run. This is what some of the pages look like from the brain mapping in the report stage. And what I'm illustrating here, because this was taken of a 16-year-old and that this was taken of that same 19-year-old male, a lot of change going on there, a lot of growth going on in those years, and he did not have any interventions in between. So this is showing the stability and validity of the results, that those things that were yellow for him at age 16 are still yellow at age 19. And then the positive news is that in the 700 brain maps that we've done, the progress from the first map to the second map, when we have brain training in between, those yellow things get unstuck. And that's important because the yellow there means you can't help it. It means this part's offline. And so you're running out of that limbic system instead. There are over 165,000 published studies on neurotraining, brain training, for a host of applications. We've been in practice 12 years, but there's more than 50 years of clinical data collected and studies published on neurofeedback, and we have practitioners all over the world. And the thing that really gets me is at the end of the process, on the kind of an exit interview, the most common thing for people to say is, I wish I'd found you sooner, or I wish I knew about neurofeedback sooner, or my cousin in Des Moines needs this and they don't know anything about it. So that's part of why I'm doing this talk today, is just to make you aware. I just want you to know what's out there and what's available to you. In our practice, we're seeing the evidence of neuroplasticity and neurogenesis for these things: ADHD, anxiety, depression, anger, and on impulsivity. We do a lot of brain injury, if I could talk, nightmares, sensory processing deficits. These are all things that we're used to addressing, and we're helping folks recover, overcome, and reverse all kinds of maladies. Learning disabilities, insomnia, stroke. So let's see what brain training ended up doing for the veteran that I showed you in the beginning. This picks up right after he's watched the first video of himself.
Let's go for it. Thanks. First. Are you already recording? Alright. I got a chance to watch the video today from whenever I first started doing the neurofeedback, and today, my last session. And I've noticed a really big difference in myself. Before I saw the video, I noticed several changes, but after looking at both the videos and then actually comparing the two, I noticed a really big difference. And I'm really glad that I was able to see both of those videos, because if it was described to me the way I looked and acted before, I never would have really believed it. But actually being able to see the difference, I think it's amazing. And plus, it's a proof that this actually works, and it works in a short amount of time. I think I totaled it up to 10 sessions, and out of 10 sessions, I think I went from being a zombie to being pretty close to normal. So, and once again, I think our group was really lucky to have this software, this technology available for our class during the whole 3 weeks. And I feel really grateful to been able to have done this, it's really sped up my healing process, and I hope I can find somebody else who has the same software and keep at this for a little bit longer.
So it still chokes me up. So first of all, you saw some sensors on his head, right? We're not brain zapping. It's not about, right? No electroconvulsive. No. This is called neurofeedback, because the sensors sit on your head in strategic placement and then read the brain activity going on right there at that location, and millisecond by millisecond feeding that through some pretty sophisticated equipment that delivers it right back to you that fast in an audio-visual feedback way. So all the changes you saw there, his brain did. His brain did that. So what did you notice? What changed?
He looked brighter.
Brighter.
Maybe you saw that immediately.
Hmm?
Yeah, I laughed.
He actually laughed, right? What else?
Posture was better.
Posture.
More emotion, more conviction.
Mm-hmm. What about the cadence of his speech? Did you notice? Yeah.
Facial expression was different, as well as his ocular tract.
That's right.
All of it changed.
That's right.
I'm still confused. What did they do to him? He's got a bunch of stuff up
Yeah.
over his head.
Yeah,
I was
so
afraid to ask that.
I'm gonna be the guy.
I'm not going to ask anything you would ask, but yeah, so he at that point had done 10 sessions, which are typically in our clinic, the training time is about 30 to 40 minutes. His were an hour, and they happened every single day for 10 days. So that's why there's just like the before and after is just stunning, because it's in such a short period of time. Most of our folks come twice a week, and so it's over the course of 3-4 months, something like that. And you can't really see that very good, but he has sensors specifically placed at certain locations. We might base that on the brain map that we took that told me all this great information about how your brain is wired. And then the feedback modality is typically a movie, something you'll stay engaged with. We do have documentaries and TV shows too, but like something that will hold your attention for 45 minutes or so. And what's happening on the screen is the screen size is changing. And if you wear headphones, which most of our clients do, the volume is fluctuating, and there's a dimming feature to the movie. Nothing that interrupts you from seeing it or hearing it, so you can stay engaged with it. But every one of those changes tags to a specific neurological change in your brain. So whenever you see the screen size change or the volume, you hear the volume going up and down, you know your brain is in the active process of learning. And then the easiest way to describe our screen as clinicians, we can actually witness the learning curve on there. There's an actual trend line that we're following. And we're able to set up, for lack of a better analogy, duck pin bowling, where you put the gutter pads in so your ball doesn't hit the gutter, right? Or a grown-up analogy would be driving on the interstate, and there's the little rhythmic bumpers that you hit with your tires if you veer out of the lane a little bit. Those are what some of those changes on the screen are doing, and it's literally operant conditioning. Literally your brain learning. And as soon as you get into a more optimal performance and functioning, and your brain recognizes that efficiency, it maintains it.
So in the second video, when he's hooked up, he's actually, because he was looking at his screen,
Right.
he was looking at the feedback and the neurofeedback that's happening within his cadence and speech, correct?
No, so like right then he just was getting ready to do a session, I'm thinking, because this was his last session, and they were interviewing him before, so I just liked that they had the sensors on so I could show you what that looked like.
Okay.
But everybody in this room is going to want to make it a conscious process of pushing the ball up the hill or driving the car or that sort of thing. That's kind of how all of us are wired, if we're honest. But actually, this is a feedback loop that's happening in that 90% that our mind can't do. So 10%, our mind knows 10% of what our brain is doing, so we could try to push the ball up the hill, but it's not going to go because we've only got 10% access to what's happening in there. So this neurofeedback actually gives us more,
So once he gets to somewhat of a normal range,
Yes.
those things stop happening in the video?
No, there's always incremental learning, so it's really up to the individual to decide when they want to be done. One of the other things we can do is repeat the brain map and see where those globy yellow orbs, are those now in a healthy range and that kind of thing. But for a person who doesn't sleep or sleeps 2 hours a night and they're sleeping 8 hours a night, and a person who didn't have a lot of affect and had low energy finds themselves able to go mow the lawn or go to their kids whatever and enjoy it, those kinds of things are feedback to you about how your brain is performing. And at some point you can stop with the training and all of those things should hold, all of those gains should hold.
You had a list up there: anxiety, depression, OCD, all these things.
Yep.
What's the relationship between kind of traditional therapy, counseling, and psychology versus where
Great
this
question.
should take over?
So therapy relies 100% on talk therapy, on what's in your mind, and talk therapy relies 100% on the mind, perspective shifting, cognitive behavioral therapies, DBT, even things like meditation, which I advocate for all of this. I think it's all great, but you're working in that 10%, whereas this is working in the 90%. So I like marrying the two, and we collaborate as a normal course of business. We collaborate with the professionals in our clients' lives if they want us to, and can feed those professionals information. So in the case of therapy or counseling, if the client wants that, I will talk with their therapist, and I can say, look, if you're working on personal boundaries, you're up against a brick wall. That is a stuck process that the amygdala is driving, and he doesn't have any decision-making power on that. And no amount of breathing in a certain way or trying to shift perspective is going to change that. However, he's really, really flexible over here at managing his urges. So if he's got urge issues, he's got control over that. Go to town, go work on that. And then we can keep them up to date with as things are progressing and as things free up. But most of the time, I get the call back from the counselor who's saying something like, the person came to mind, I've been doing talk therapy for 5 years. The last 3 months or so, we have been trudging the same ground over and over and over, and we didn't have any traction. And then you got to thus and such point of the plan, and they came in for their session, and we started down the normal thing, and instead of looping, we went forward, and we had traction. So it's pretty obvious stuff. It's pretty recognizable. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
What's causing all this? Like, is this something we just learned about since the 70s, or is it cell phones? Is it antibiotics in the chicken? Were people doing this in the 40s?
So no, the first neurofeedback training was so rudimentary. It was a red and a green light, and they used it with seizure patients at the time. And even with just that super basic, they were able to, their brains were rewired for more stability from that instability. But that was maybe in the 50s and 60s. And then when we got into the 70s, then there was a lot of attention on the alpha brain wave rhythm, which is the one that's awake and alert, relaxed and calm. And so there were a lot of things that came out, transcendental meditation, and among them became like all the rage. And there are some things that we can do with neurofeedback that emerged at that time. But by the 90s, this was out of the research lab and into clinics and into providers' locales.
I think that the question really is why is there, everything that I read, there's so much more anxiety and stress on the average human being today because of the inflow of information, that we have more access to information on our iPhone that somebody 200 years ago saw in their lifetime.
Yeah.
Is that really the driver of the increase of the anxiety? It's not really the process that you have to help us with it. What is the driver of the increase of anxiety, ADHD,
right.
Nightmare, insomnia? Not that it's just now, but why is it so much more other than do we just studying it more?
Well, definitely.
Grandpa burned out. The soldiers of the Civil War burned out.
Yeah.
As an example,
Yeah.
I'm surprised you didn't mention dopamine or dopamine.
Yeah, I didn't get, deciding what to put in this talk was really tough. Like, I can't tell you the number of hours I was like, that's a whole rabbit trail, that's over here. But, dopamine and addiction, dopamine and the reward system in the brain, all of that is a big deal. It's all controlled, though, by the structure and the function and the autonomic nervous system in the brain. So that's where I ended up kind of staying with the talk, so we didn't bury ourselves under, mountains of information. But yes, I don't know that I have some magic answer on why are we experiencing, you said it very well. I mean, technology is a big part of it. It used to be simple survival. Survival was simple. It was about killing or be killed, like eat or be eaten. And it was pretty straightforward, and you had to know 5 or 6 skills and you did fine. That's just not how it is now. We have to have laws about not texting while you're driving, because we're actually trying to do those 2 things at once, and we're driving. No, there's no such thing, right? This is why, though, think about it, if you've ever, and I'm sure nobody in this room has, but if you've ever texted even once while you were driving, if you look up and you're not in the lane and you're weaving, or you're slowed down, or your brain cannot maneuver those 2 things at once. But so I think that's a big piece of it. Certainly, the technology and the demands. We're expected to do so much more, so much faster. And we're supposed to be equally good at parenting, and we're supposed to have read every book on how to do all this stuff, and somewhere in there we're supposed to be fitting in things that take care of us, and that's the thing that goes. So that's the other side of it, is the well-being piece loses its emphasis, and so we're not balancing anymore. Remember my sympathetic and parasympathetic analogy. We don't balance it. But my experience is every person that walks in is different, and the way their brain has responded is different, because some of them had childhood trauma, and some of them have been through 2 divorces, and some of them have a really sick kid with cancer, and some of them themselves survived cancer, or any number of other kinds of illnesses, and those things take a real toll. But it would tie back to all those things on the blue charts where I was talking about the balance and the way the nervous system adapts. So if you learned ADHD, like Richard Restack wrote a book where he's talking about the fact that we are literally training our brains for ADHD. We're training them every day. We're training our brains to be ADHD. And that's partly because the prefrontal cortex goes offline too much. And then the other is the multitasking. Yeah.
So under that thought process,
Yeah.
we're the blank slate, tabula rasa, I guess, when you come out as a baby, and then our brain is learning from that moment.
Actually from in utero.
Okay, so at conception or wherever there's brain tissue.
Right.
So all of our mental malady, for lack of a better term, is driven by environmental stimuli over time, and how it impacts the brain mapping that we fundamentally have, and therefore sticks, for lack of a better term. For instance, ADHD, you know, you're doing those things, you're learning that, or processing speed, or stutter, or, you know, all those type of scenarios from a learning perspective, which is different than stroke, which is going to be a blood flow, oxygenation issue.
Yeah, even cell death, right?
So with that in mind, so all those maladies, the theory is that biofeedback can have a impact, I'm not gonna say positive, impact on that, hopefully positive, but could have an impact on those learned responses, whether it is the small part of the brain, frontal, that's the theory on all this, and that's what the work has shown.
So the theory of neuroplasticity is that your brain can learn bad stuff or good stuff. That's what neuroplasticity is. It can learn the bad stuff and it can learn the good stuff. And we've definitely seen individuals who had in utero problems. The baby had to be, you know, forcibly removed because there was things going on that wouldn't have made it through the birth canal. So, and those individuals, the default networks of their brain get compromised before they ever have a chance, you know. But that's not true for all of us. Some of us just go through really, really hard car accidents or death of a spouse or a parent or a child. Any of those sort of traumatic events in life, definitely we can see that in the brain. We can actually see those changes.
But it doesn't have to be a traumatic event.
Doesn't have to be.
It has to be some type of scenario that connects to your brain map in a way that makes the impact that creates.
I would suggest that all experience impacts how your brain changes. And that we have 700 new neurons a day, so a lot can change in a given day. And it doesn't have to all be traumatic. Those are just the most dramatic examples to give, but certainly TBI is not something the person chose. You know, there's nothing about the way they were choosing to live, right? Right.
It's just one of those things
Right.
that happen. So, okay.
So then the idea about feedback modalities in general, and this isn't a sales talk, this is an education talk, right? So the feedback modalities are about in the moment. Think with the gutter, you know, the gutter pads or whatever, helping that brain find its way. It's almost like a top. You spin a top on a glass table, it's doing beautifully, and it'll stay like that for a really, really long time. But you walk past and bump the table really hard, and then it gets a wobble, and it doesn't know how to get the wobble out. Not all the time. Sometimes our brains are pretty amazing. So it's amazing what we can recover from. You ever had the flu and thought for sure you're dying this time, and you couldn't get to the bathroom, the energy it took you to get from the bed to the bathroom and back that's your day. You're done for the day. And yet here you are today, and you're healthy, and you're moving along, and you're making decisions and doing your life. So our brains and our bodies are amazing. The feedback modalities, whether it's brain or body, have to do with feeding information that's helpful for that brain to rewire and structurally take those 700 new neurons and use them for the good. And that's literally how that works. Yeah. Yep.
Where does EMDR therapy fit?
So EMDR would be in the talk therapy and in the mental space, in the mind space. And it's typically used, just for anybody who in the room who doesn't know, it's typically used for resolving of trauma, past trauma, and it does involve re-experiencing, right? You have to talk through your trauma at the same time that the brain is being bilaterally stimulated, either visually or auditory wise. And it has to do with desensitization, actually, is the heart of that. There's a feedback modality that actually began back in that alpha phase, like in the 70s, 80s, and then was replicated many, many times from 90s and into the 2000s for alcoholics. And they developed it to help alcoholics in their quest for sobriety. And there were 3 groups, all of them alcoholics, long-term alcoholics. One group that used 12-step by itself, one group that did 12-step and this particular kind of neuro training, and then a control group 5 years later, the only group that was still sober was the ones that had combined it, the 12-step, the mind, with the brain training. So anyway, that particular kind is a way of resolving trauma that does not involve re-experiencing. So there's a little difference there, yeah.
What's your thoughts on some of these headsets that are coming out, the neuroscience?
Yeah, they're plug and play, and I would just go back to, I've never seen two brains look alike, so they have to keep it pretty high level, but they're getting better and better. Yeah.
How about, I know that I follow a couple on Facebook, like on
Yeah.
Kickstarter, and they're claiming that you could literally tap into more of your brain by wearing, like literally learn to play guitar faster by wearing this headset.
Wow.
Or is that just
Okay, I want some of that. That would be good. But I mean, things are. I look. It's like walking through a doorway, and what's on the other side, I don't know, because where we are now compared to 20 years ago, night and day difference. It's amazing what's possible now. In fact, I think I have a pretty let's look at this one really quick. This is. I'll just let it. It's in Brazil. This is a study right now going on in Brazil. Is it playing? Oh, it's not playing, Morgan. Go. I wonder if I can push it. Okay. It's a study in Brazil where they're working with paraplegics and using a bodysuit for biofeedback and sensors on the head for neurofeedback. And these individuals, 6 months or a year into the program, are starting to be able to move parts of their limbs. They're regaining control over their bladder, over their bowels, that's the game right there, like for those folks. That's amazing. So I encourage you to go on. You can just Google Brazil study neurofeedback and pull this up. It's not even, I want you to see that picture. So it looks like that, and that's what the video is about. But that's absolutely the most cutting edge of science. Like, we're not doing that in our practice for sure. But man, isn't that the coolest thing?
It's pretty cool, but Tom just wants to learn guitar.
He just wants guitar. That's
I
awesome.
use more than 2% of my brain. I'll get to the 10 whenever. Stop rounding
Yeah.
up, Tom. I read a book a couple years ago called Brain Wars,
Okay.
And it was, I thought it was the same similar thing about sort of brain magic. They were doing three-dimensional down in Southern California, this clinic. And
Okay.
Three-dimensional pictures of your brain showing where pot marks are to.
Okay, that's probably SPECT scan,
Okay.
and it's most likely the Amen Clinic, because he's kind of pioneering in this field. It costs about $10,000 to get one of those scans done, and then he does a basic brain map, and the training that comes out of that, he sends them to people like us to carry that aspect out, because there's nothing right now to bridge SPECT scan and the neuro training. Like, you have to understand, it looks like this over here, and so when we're working with it over here, how do we translate that? But what we do very well with that is quantitative EEG, or brain mapping, QEEG, as the measure. And then there's basic ones, which is the most, in fact, the 165,000 studies that I sort of flipped through for you, those are almost all of those are informed by a standard or basic brain map, which basically takes a snapshot of your brain at that given moment, whether you had a good breakfast or had coffee or not, and whether you slept well. And if you're sitting there worried about some news from your doctor, it's a snapshot of brain state essentially, and then they put together a protocol that will address what they saw. Ours is an advanced QEEG, and there's only a few places in the world, about 12 places in the world, that you can go to get an advanced QEEG. And the difference is it's measuring trait behavior in the brain. the brain's trait stuff, the stuff that will look the same on Monday and Thursday, regardless of the hour that you do that test for that individual. So my main message there is neurofeedback works, whether it's being informed by a basic brain map or an advanced one. It's just a matter of, how thorough. So, and then before that would be the, kickstart gizmos that are starting to come out. Right now I'm evaluating a sleep headband. I'm not comfortable with the Fitbit style of monitoring your sleep because some people sleep like a statue, like this, and they're wide awake, but they're like, their body is not moving. So it's not very thorough in my opinion. So I like the idea of measuring brain waves. And so I'm right now using a headband at home, and it's able to monitor my sleep stages and how long it took me to fall asleep, how many times I woke up. It tells me, it'll say, you had a tumultuous night. You turned over in your bed 38 times, but it tells me what my resting heart rate was throughout the night, all that kind of stuff. And those kinds of informative gizmos, for lack of a better, do make a difference. Yeah, I made changes based on what I saw there. Well, I need to be more consistent with my going to sleep time. And if I watch that TV show, it takes me 2 hours to fall asleep. Or if I watch that TV show before bed, then I'm tossing and turning all night. But the night I slept really great was the night that I did, yoga or meditation or whatever, some other techniques. So those are feedback modalities. That's a feedback loop. And we're just doing that millisecond by millisecond in our trainings to try to dovetail that together. So good. So that's it for brain. You don't seem burned out to me by the material, right? No? Okay. Well, there are some more low-tech and familiar things that you could be doing, and I just want to go through them quickly. We don't have to spend a lot of time here. What we think, what we believe, and what we think about. Our thoughts are very powerful. I have a quote here from LeBron James says that while the greats master the body, the greatest master the mind. I think we've lost the art of observation. In quantum theory, there's something called the observer effect. And I'm not going to pretend to know all about that, but it basically shows that just by observing something, it changes that thing. And so the application here for us today is that just by observing our stressors, just by observing stress effects in our body or in our brain, we can change something in physiologic response to the observation, which mindfulness meditation, yoga, there's multiple forms of meditation. So why would we meditate? Why would we go to the trouble? Who has time for that? Who here has tried meditation? Wow. Okay. Keep your hand up if you are proficient, if you've mastered it. Oh, okay. What did you say? Keep trying, right? I'm in there, I'm trying, I'm doing it every day. Here's the problem with meditation. I love it. It's a fabulous practice, but it takes practice. So if you want to know how to do that, you do have to actually put the energy and the time and all of that into it. So the thing about meditation, just to give you since so many of you have done that, how do you know how many minutes you were in the zone? How do you know if you do a meditation session and you were like, oh, that was a good one for me? How do you know? How do you know? Timer, okay.
You just believe it was good.
You just think it. Well, thoughts are very valuable and very important. So the distinction between meditation, as an example, and any of the biofeedback techniques is that you are measuring. Well, as it turns out, we can actually measure meditation. So we have something called computer-aided meditation. And we have it in two forms, one in the office and one you take home, which is probably, in these busy lives, a little more realistic. They took the equipment to India, and they put it on a yogi. Yes, what he said. And he did 20 minutes of computer-aided meditation, and then he went home, and he came back the next day, and he was asked a series of questions. It's on YouTube. You can look it up. And he talks about how that 20 minutes that was computer-aided meditation was the equivalent of a level 4 out of 10 of his meditation. He got from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 in 20 minutes, which would have, he said, would have equated to about 2 hours of meditation.
What is computer meditation?
So it is a type of neurofeedback. It is measuring brain waves from specific locations on your head and feeding that information back through the equipment and rewarding the meditative state. Every time your brain clicks into the meditative state, there's an immediate, that's it. Keep doing that. More of that. So your brain starts to get into that groove much more easily. Yeah.
I think so. I'm a pretty basic person. Looking at this. I've heard this statement. Your brain's a muscle. Okay?
It is.
Right. Yeah. I've heard
Yeah.
that. I don't know.
It actually grows in size as well.
Okay. So in this case, would your example of the feedback loop
Yep,
be effectively giving your brain a workout on?
it is.
What's happening?
It is. We actually do 3 kinds of neurofeedback, and this is not in the talk because it's, it's maybe too much information, but just as a brief statement, there are multiple kinds of neurofeedback, some of which would be the equivalent of like going in a gym and doing the elliptical, or as my husband calls it, the Satan machine, or the treadmill, or a Pilates class, those kinds of things. Some neurofeedback is in that category. That's one of our methods. Then we have a method that's much more like having a personal trainer that says, your bicep's way stronger than your tricep, and we need to balance that. So let's do these tricep things to get that balanced. Let's measure again. How does that look? Is it balanced now? Yes, the gym analogy and the muscle and all of that is applicable, but depending on which method you're using, it goes about it in a different way.
So kind of like the different brain, that would be the different body style, like in that way.
Yeah. So the one that's like a personal trainer that's taken all those measurements, that's the brain mapping method. And then we have this other method that has things like computer-aided meditation and something called alpha theta, which is the trauma resolution without re-experiencing. Those aspects are much more Pilates yoga end of things instead of the calisthenic exercise aspect for the brain. Yeah. All right, any other questions about any of that? Mm-hmm.
How was the standard developed? Something seems oversized in comparison to something else.
Yeah, there's definitely norms. So that's one of the other differences between the different brain maps. So the standard brain map uses a pretty big pool. So in that pool is going to have migraineurs, fibromyalgia, ADHD, autism, all lumped together. And so you'll end up with norms that tell you certain things are out of bounds, from that look at it. From our advanced QEEG, it's using the base that we're comparing to is the Brodmann Atlas, which is the 55 areas for supernormals. So these are highly successful people who've never been on medication, pilots, people who deal with a lot of stress and perform very, very well, Navy SEALs kind of people. Yeah, and so then you get your bell-shaped curve, and you're 2 off the norm or 1 off the norm, and all that's very measurable. That was the color system I was showing you, was a little piece of that. Okay, it is 4:41. I have how many minutes? 19. Okay, so I was just going to tell you that things that involve the thought are very, very powerful, and there have been some studies. So meditating is 3 times deeper body state rest than sitting with your eyes closed. So if you can get there, you might need the computer-aided part, but you can get there. A lot of people don't. I mean, you can do well with that. The amygdala and the autonomic nervous system deactivate. The immune system and the cell regeneration resume. That's why people who are able to meditate on a regular basis don't get sick as much. Attention and concentration improve. So those are all really good reasons. Then there's the power of the heart and connection. And I have a video here that I'm going to skip in the interest of time. But the heart is where we feel emotion, and where, for a lot of people, toxic stress is expressed like tight constriction in my chest, or cardiac abnormalities, things like that. We are wired up here for gratitude, and that connects down to our heart. So if we can use positive emotions, specifically, as it so happens, gratitude, we can get our brain to make some changes in the moment, and it's verifiable because it's measurable. Those are measurable things. I love that video, but we're going to skip it. So I don't know who can relate to this one, but the power of no is more powerful than we give it credit for. I mean, we could park here and talk for a while, but let me just suffice to say that some of our huge pile of stressors that we have in our life could be simplified, could be delegated, or just downright deleted. Like, saying no is a gift to yourself, and honestly, it's a gift to other people who are relying on you for other things. So to quote a colleague of mine, she says, no is not selfish, it's self-full. And I just want you to ponder that for a little bit. I don't know if this will play, and it's long. We'll skip it. Anybody seen the movie, oops, it is going to play. Anybody seen the movie About Time? Okay, that's like my top 3 movies of all time, so put it on your list. But in this movie, it's a romantic comedy, but he has this unusual superpower where he can go back and relive any day he wants. He can go back and change things, do it differently. And what he learns by the end of the movie is kind of the secret to living life with joy and happiness, and it boils down to what we're noticing, what we're paying attention to, and what our perspective is. That's a movie like to put on your weekend, especially father-sons. Oh my gosh, it's the fabulous father-son movie. And you walk away from it, our family saw it together, and we concluded the movie and thought, I want to do that. And so we made a pledge to each other that we would try for 3 days to do what he does, which he basically says that in the end, he relives every day, but he doesn't try to change anything. Instead, he simply goes through that same day with optimism and joy and connection and gratitude. Sorry to, boil it down for you. It was kind of a powerful clip, but it was like 8 minutes long, so we really didn't have time for that. At the end of which, there's a joke, and it makes you laugh. And I do want to say, you guys have done this a lot here today. Laughter is truly the best medicine, and it shouldn't overlook that. These are things that are in your tool chest right now. So to quote a proverb made famous by the movie The Shining, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. So I would encourage you to explore one new thing per day. If you can't do one new thing each day, then do one new thing per week. If you can't do one new thing per week, then do one new thing per month. But for your brain to change, you have to mix it up. The stuff that we do on autopilot, getting from home to work when you didn't even pay attention, like you have no idea how you got there, that stuff is well-worn trenches in your brain, and there's no new learning going on. Switch up your route, do something a little bit differently. Last 10 minutes or so here, I really was planning to just sort of introduce the idea that everybody has a superpower, not time travel, but that we all have something that we could leverage about our physiology if we just are taught that, if we're just shown how to do that. You have innate resources, and you can use them. The way that we do that is we measure something. One that everybody's familiar with is respiration. So you put a band around your middle and you measure your respiration as you're being taught how to improve that system and find your resonant breathing frequency. But there are others. There's hand temperature, hand warming. There's galvanic skin response, which is what they use when they're lie detecting. And we can look at respiration and heart rate variability and blood pressure, and we've got heart rate variability as a measure, which is the only two that I plan to really talk about at any length was the very first one, which is the hand temperature, and the very last one to come on the scene, which is heart rate variability, because it encapsulates the power that's built into all those individual. However, for some people, it'll be one of the other techniques is life-changing for them. So the very first technique was thermal, and it was originally used 150 years ago for Raynaud's syndrome people. Icy hands and feet. Anybody have that? And do you also have migraines? No? 90% of the people who were in the study back then with Raynaud's syndrome also had migraines. So hand temperature, warming of your hands volitionally, taking charge of that automatic aspect about your nervous system, warms the hands, and it has to do with getting the blood vessels to open, and that changes up here too in terms of blood flow, and you end up with migraine, a migraine approach that is very, very effective. Just to demonstrate, this is the Swami Rama. He was able to get one side of his hand to be 11 degrees different than the other side of his hand. This side turned pink, this side turned gray, and they had thermometers attached to each side. So the extent to which you can take these techniques is pretty powerful and very astonishing. He did that under laboratory conditions, and he also caused his heart to stop pumping for 16.2 seconds while he was sitting motionless during the demonstration. So. Well, you've heard about the people walking on hot coals and all, warming their body to a degree when they're standing on ice, that kind of thing. We have more controlled messages. We have more control than we know. And the last thing that I wanted to tell you about was the HRV biofeedback, which stands for heart rate variability. And this is the newest one to come on the scene for biofeedback professionals. And it came about because cardiologists use heart rate variability. If anybody has ever been to the cardiologist, I promise you, they measured your heart rate variability because it's a fantastic indicator for how likely you are to have an eventual cardiac episode. And also in heart rate variability, there were specific wave patterns that was associated with panic disorder. So that's where this particular modality began, in intersecting with individuals who had panic disorder. And if they were taught to have control over their heart rate variability and thereby make it better, then they could actually ward off a panic attack or come out of a panic attack very rapidly. The heart has its own neural network, and spoiler alert, it's already on there, but your heart sends more messages to the brain than the other way around. And that's astonishing. Our emotions obviously are tied up in the heart. You would expect that. But those are the heart rhythms. On the left-hand side is what somebody who's in a moment of frustration, heart rate variability looks like, and this is somebody who's been training or uses gratitude, as it turns out. All right, so big roundup is just the skills that got you here aren't the ones that help you manage the stress, and that's why it seems so hard, because you want to use the skills you've practiced. You have to actually learn some new ones. Only thing I will tell you is that commitment is one you're very familiar with. That's one that you've practiced and practiced and practiced. Apply it to your life, whether it's low tech or high tech, whatever you end up doing, but take care of your brain and it will take care of you. So that's the end of the talk. I wanted to let you know that if you really do want to know if you are nearing burnout or in burnout, there's an actual assessment. It takes way too long for us to do here. But if you'll go to the mindgarden.com, you'll see the list of all the different assessments that you can do. And I thought that might be interesting. And I wanted to briefly introduce Morgan Hodge and Beatrice Freeman, who are with me on my team and are here to answer questions as well. So I'm happy to answer some more Q&A now, or if we're really bumping the edge of time. Yes?
So how do you evaluate people in this profession? So we all have our own standard of how you pick a
Great
doctor,
question,
how
and I
you
didn't
pick
talk
a
about that.
How do I know I'm not going to get trained to be a killer or something?
So first,
Handing over a lot of,
first of all, remember that it's not brain zapping. Let's get that part really, really.
you might not be going to brain zapping.
That's true.
I know the other guy.
You know, that's actually fair to say that. There are some certifying bodies internationally, one international and one that is U.S. based. The one that you want is BCIA. It's the Biofeedback Certification International Alliance. You want somebody trained and certified because it's a board certification. It takes 2, 3, 4 years to meet all the standards on that. It's a really big deal. And then if it were my cousin in Des Moines, I would be telling them to look specifically for 2 kinds of neurofeedback. One that is called infralow, and the other is the QEEG driven. The QEEGs vary because you have your standard brain maps and then you have your advanced ones. So there's a small network of people who are willing to go to the number of years and expense to get the training for the advanced Q. So those are farther between. But if they're California, if they're New York, if they're big cities, then they'll probably be able to find somebody. Yes.
So, my daughter is going to be 9 and has trouble sleeping.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's going on here, but trying to get an appointment with a sleep specialist for her is like an 8-week wait.
Wow.
And it seems like
Mhm.
what you spoke about might help to understand what's going
Yeah.
on there.
Actually, one of the practitioners that works for me came to work for me because her daughter had this scenario, except it had gotten to the point where she was waking up screaming and waking up the family and wouldn't sleep alone and comes and gets in your bed. And okay, so this is how it was for her. And we can usually get you underway within a week to help. And we're working there with the regulatory systems of the brain that manage our sleep to get the whole nervous system to calm down. And it's pretty great on that. No, but I don't know what's going to happen. I didn't make this a sales pitch because you guys can't all come. You can't all come.
You can, but then
There will be a wait, right?
Yeah, you just sold all of us.
No, I mean that's. No, we actually have 12 different specialties, and we're the only place that I know of. And Morgan joined our practice from Wisconsin because we were the only place she could find that did all of the biofeedback and neurofeedbacks that are available at the highest level. And so nobody on our team is a technician. Everybody is fully board certified themselves and could go out on their own if they wanted to. So because I have all those choices of different things, some things we can literally get you in this afternoon or tomorrow, and some things might be a week wait. The brain map, as you might figure, is typically 3 to 4 weeks out. Right this second, we're 5 weeks out on the brain map. But typically we stay about 3 weeks out is what we try. So, yeah. But I'm seriously not here to sell you. That's not, it really and truly, I'm looking at this group as you guys get the word out about this stuff. people in other cities, even other countries. Part of our training was from a group in Germany that's doing something really cool. So we got trained by them. Yeah.
What does insurance think about this?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So it's coming. So when I started 12 years ago, I had to spell the word biofeedback. No one had literally never heard of it. And now I'm getting phone calls for new client consults and stuff where they're using the terminology. Do you do QEEG and neurofeedback and blah, blah. So there's more of that, and that awareness is pulling out. Our big hurdle is pharma, big pharma, because these are non-medication solutions for the same things the pharmas are being used for. So they have lots of lobbyists with the insurance companies, and until 2019, we didn't have one. We didn't even have a lobbyist. We have two now that's fighting the battle at that level. The QEEG is more likely to be covered because it's not even reliant on what your diagnosis code is. The neurofeedback or biofeedback training may or may not be covered. Some of the Rolls-Royce plans that are out there do cover it. And also some diagnoses. For instance, they've sort of cherry-picked. So migraine, almost always, that one is a refundable, what do I want to say? A covered expense that gets refunded. The way we operate, our prices are really reasonable, so we don't hire somebody who's going to go fight with the insurance companies and do a bunch of paper that way. So it would be on a reimbursement basis with us, but there are probably some people who are on an insurance panel or two. Yeah.
So having a migraine and getting into you is kind of like having glaucoma and being able to get medical marijuana?
Couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, there are certain things you don't have to live with that we think we have to live with, And chronic pain, migraine can become chronic pain. That's sort of your brain gets programmed expecting this pain to be there, and you almost don't know when you don't have one. And that's a central process in the brain that can be rewired. So you don't have to live with that stuff. And you don't have to do the rabbit trail of medication where you start with this one and take this one to handle the side effects of the first, I do recommend anybody who's doing meds to get the gene site testing done so you know how fast a metabolizer you are of those chemicals and which ones to steer clear of rather than trial and error. It's not a fun process, so know about that. Okay, anything else? In the social hour, we'll hang out for a little bit, so any of the three of us, if you want to come ask specific questions. I hope you all enjoyed this. Do you feel like you have at least one thing you walked away with? Something you learned? Okay, good.